Attention, listeners. Do you ever find yourself struggling to decide what to watch on a Saturday night when you're in the mood for horror? Or perhaps you're trying to round out your own horror film education. In either case, I'm sure you'll be able to make some great discoveries in my 10 by 10 horror watch list, featuring a breakdown of the 10 favorite horror movies from 10 renowned horror directors. We did a deep dive of the favorite horror movies from directors including Guillermo del Toro, Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, Quentin Tarantino, James Gunn, Rob Zombie, Martin Scorsese, and many, many more. Here you'll find a collection of each director's favorite horror movies, along with quotes about what they appreciated about the films, all in an easy-to-reference PDF that you can download absolutely free. Featuring a mix of well-worn classics and deep cuts, hopefully you'll discover some overlooked gems and look at old classics through new lenses. Download the 10 by 10 horror watch list for free by visiting nicktaylor.com/horror guide. That's nicktaylor.com/horror guide. We're also brought to you by Deadly Grounds Coffee. It's the #1 choice of horror fans worldwide. Nothing starts your day or night better than a delicious cup of Deadly Grounds. Whether you're hunting ghosts or fighting the next zombie apocalypse, any one of Deadly's 30-plus roasts will bring you to caffeine nirvana with the richest flavor you've ever had. Whether you're craving their Hellhound Roast, Witch's Brew, Devil's Night Roast, or Sinful Delight, order online at getdeadly.com for easy and safe shipping right to your door. We know that once you go Deadly, you won't go back. Join the Deadly Revolution today. Be bold, be different, be deadly. Deadly Grounds Coffee. Coffee to die for and zombie approved. Get some at getdeadly.com. Welcome back to the Nick Taylor Horror Show. Brian Yuzna is a man who needs no introduction. A writer, director, producer, Brian Yuzna produced multiple movies directed by Stuart Gordon, including Reanimator, Dagon, From Beyond, and Dolls. Brian directed one of my personal favorite deep cuts, which is Society. If you have not seen Society, do yourself a favor and watch it, ideally with Joe Bob on Shudder. Brian also directed Bride of Reanimator, Silent Night, Deadly Night 4, Beyond Reanimator, Return of the Living Dead 3, and many, many more. He is an icon of horror, and it was an absolute honor to speak with him. I previously spoke to Brian in an earlier episode about remembering Stuart Gordon, which I highly recommend checking out. Brian mostly focuses that conversation discussing his collaboration with and what he learned from Stuart Gordon. This conversation is a little more wide-ranging. Brian talks about the current state of horror, a number of directorial lessons he's learned along the way, both in his own career and from observing the career of others. And overall, it just paints a really good picture of what it takes to be a horror filmmaker. In any case, hope you enjoy. Please give it up for the legendary Brian Yuzna.
You know, they say that the best gift you can give a newborn isn't intelligence, wit, good looks, riches. The best thing you can give them is good luck.
Okay.
You know?
So that's what today's horror filmmakers need is good luck.
I think so. Well, I think you always have needed good luck to kind of make any money in the movie business. But I think, you know, for horror movie makers, of course, generally they're independent.
Yeah.
It's kind of like having a garage band, like aspiring to be a band, you know,
right.
Like a rock and roll band, or back in the day, this was like, you know, it's not like I'm going to go work for A&M Records and, you know.
Yeah.
So I imagine all of your listeners, aspiring horror movie makers, they're not thinking about trying to get a job get their project at Warner Brothers, although maybe they are, or Netflix, right?
That's the big one now. Yeah.
That's what they want. Yeah.
That's what they think.
So then they've got to make a calling card.
Yes.
Right. Because probably most of them didn't go to USC Film School. They didn't go to these places that are, you know, you have to they call the entrance. You've got to get in.
Right.
And then you get the great advantage of kind of making contact with, getting to be friends or at least acquaintances with a whole bunch of people who are doing the same thing you are.
Yeah. I heard that's the big advantage of film school is the networking.
That's it. Yeah. And it also, I must say, knowing a few people who have gone to the, to big film schools. I never did. I never had a film class in my life.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's a value to it, especially the ones that are that they basically make movies.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to a college that's going to give you a degree, like USC or UCLA, or you also have to go to regular classes.
Right.
So you're stuck having to go to college, which I think is a good thing.
Okay.
Good idea to learn stuff. Very good idea. But I think all of them now, all the film schools now, they basically try to replicate the experience of making a movie. So they tend to, each person chooses what they want to do. Like somebody wants to be a DP, and somebody wants to write, and somebody wants to produce, and most everybody wants to direct.
Right.
And I think that then you have to mount your project, and you have to kind of raise money for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And AFI. Yeah, that's the big. It's the big one that isn't like just a regular university. My nephew went there, and actually Richard Gladstein, who produced the Silent Night, Deadly Night movies,
wow.
I did, and also produced Reservoir Dogs, Green Lantern.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And ended up producing a lot of Quentin Tarantino's movies.
Yeah.
He was actually the dean of the AFI for a while there.
It's good that you people with industry experience actually teaching the classes. I feel like that's critical.
The thing is, it's only about that, and they curate the students. I think they only take 120 students and stuff.
I think Ari Aster went there. The guy who did Midsommar and Hereditary.
Oh, yeah?
I think he did AFI.
Hey, so did Blue Velvet.
David Lynch.
Lynch made his first movie there.
Oh, Eraserhead?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Eraserhead was made as a AFI project.
I didn't know that.
It's funny because I saw Eraserhead when it was a midnight show at the Waverly in New York City.
Whoa.
And I always thought it was a New York made movie.
Yeah.
It didn't look California at all.
It feels about as New York as it gets.
It just didn't look California at all.
Yeah.
And yet David Lynch made it under the AFI, and then made a bunch of very California-like movies.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think anybody who's looking for advice from someone you have as a guest on your show about how to kind of get into making horror movies probably isn't going to the AFI and USC and UCLA and
maybe not
and what's going down in Orange County. But the advantage of that is, of course, you get to meet people who are going to be probably on the way up because it's already been curated, easier to get an agent, because that's the big thing. You've got to get a representation, and it's hard to get representation. It's hard to get anybody decent. And then of course, you can't get, how do you get a job?
Yeah.
And I think most people, when we're younger, we also, not just in the movie business, but we have this idea that if we just work hard and do the right thing, our talent is going to get us into the club, in this club, this structure that's there for you.
Right.
And one of the terrible things about life is I don't think that happens on any level.
Well, what is it that does distinguish those who make it versus those who don't? Because I think you're right. A lot of people think
I think, well, I'm going to just say good luck, but of course you have to, good luck means being ready for an opportunity,
Right.
maybe, I don't know. Using whatever advantages that you have. I have it's funny, two of my sons went to high school and one junior high school as well in Barcelona when I was in Spain doing the Fantastic Factory.
Mm-hmm.
So they went to the international school there. And I decided at one point that I was going to make a film club at their school and make a movie.
Okay.
Show them how to make a movie. And that way I would kind of be doing something with my kids every week.
Yeah.
Right. And I had them all write like a 3-page script. And then almost nobody did. Like 15 people, 20 people came, right?
Okay.
High school. And this is Spain. So it's an international school. So there are different nationalities.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was only one guy who actually was so dedicated. He wrote 2 scripts.
Oh, wow.
And he was really driven. He was really into movies. And so he was Catalan. And we ended up making his short film. And then his parents let him go to school in SoCal because because we were here. Mm-hmm. I actually entered into a business deal with his dad.
Oh, okay.
And so he went to school here and he made a couple of short films because that's kind of what you do in film school. And that Chapman University, Chapman?
I've heard of it.
They have the biggest production facilities, I think, of any school in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Very conservative place down it's in the city of Orange, I think.
Okay.
And so he had a short that kind of won an award in I think in some like the HBO Comedy Awards films or something in Colorado or something. So he got an award, right? Mm-hmm. And made another short film and I sent his short to the head of feature films at UTA.
Okay. Wow.
I just worked with him before he was ever that.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm not represented by UTA. I've never had an agent, right?
Oh wow. We're gonna have to talk about that.
But I thought, look at this. It's good. Maybe you can represent him. And he turned him down. Because these agents, they're looking, there's tons of people trying to get in. And then you got to have you have to have a management. But this guy kept working at it. And eventually, I forget who he's represented. I think his agency now might even be UTA. I don't know. It's one of the big ones.
Yeah.
But his management usually, I guess it's not important to get big time management necessarily. Mm-hmm. You kind of want to have management that maybe are more personal to you.
Yeah. You want a manager who cares.
If you're big enough, then the management's going to care about you, the big ones.
Right.
So there's that whole kind of getting in the doorway and getting represented. And he still couldn't get a movie.
Oh, gosh.
He was offered stuff. He developed stuff for like horror. I'm talking horror here.
Yeah.
Like Blumhouse and these things it's very complicated.
Yeah.
And finally, the one thing that he did have going for him is that he's Spanish, he's Catalan. Mm-hmm. And he was able to, through my old casting director in Spain, was doing adaptations of theater plays, Spanish,
Yeah.
low budget and stuff. So he got to do one of those, and then he had a feature. Then his family supported him to make a horror movie here,
Mm-hmm.
and of a pretty good budget. And then he still wasn't. He was getting kind of some scripts and stuff, and he finally went back to Spain.
Uh-huh.
And now he's working constantly on TV in Spain, on series, a Netflix series. Netflix.
Oh, good for him. So he made it.
But he's working. He's a working director.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making, how many of the people listening to this have that option of having a family that can back you?
Right.
Right. I never did. Right. I don't know.
Right.
Some people do. But just because you have a rich uncle doesn't mean that you can make it work.
Yeah.
You can make a movie and still have a hard time.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that this is there's lots of people making movies, lots of them. I mean, if you can do, this guy, I think, had lots of advantages, and it's still tough.
Mm-hmm.
It's still tough. And then you have people like my friend Jackson Stewart, who made Beyond the Gate.
Mm-hmm.
A very low budget movie that he raised the money for, and it got its money back. But he's still trying to get a second movie.
Right.
I don't know. There's a lot of horror movie directors that do independent movies, and they kind of have a festival kind of spark to them.
Right.
They get kind of fans. And then you notice that you'd think, oh, they're going to get the big deals, and they don't.
Yeah.
They don't get,
It's unfortunate.
It's a whole business. It's kind of being connected. I don't think it's always, sometimes it's just about some people are really, really talented,
right.
Or they're talented in the right way.
Yeah.
So you take somebody like James Wan, who, kind of was just kind of clicked that, he didn't hit it big out of the gate, but
mm-hmm.
he somehow was able to hang in there with the Saw.
Yep.
And then the next thing you know, he's doing Fast and the Furious, which I have no idea how that works.
And Aquaman.
I've never been there. No, it's just that idea that some people can work within the big structures.
Yeah.
And some people can't. Why was Stuart Gordon not like an A-list director? I'm not sure I've met many directors that I think that were better than, more talented than him.
Yeah.
He was super talented, but he certainly didn't fit into the big productions. Christoph Gans, who I produced his first two movies. Christoph Gans is a French director,
mm-hmm.
and he did one of the episodes of Necronomicon.
Okay.
And he did the first one, the one that's like this super hyper Roger Corman kind of movie, and he's really talented. He was a critic in France, mm-hmm. So he had a TV show, but he's a young guy. Back then, we were all younger,
right?
And he did Necronomicon, and then we did Crying Freeman, which in this country nobody's seen because of some legal battles, but in Europe was very successful. It's a beautiful, really great movie. It's based on a Japanese manga called Crying Freeman, about a Yakuza assassin who's been brainwashed to kill.
Oh, wow.
And he kind of cries every time he kills.
Little like Ichi the
Crying Freeman.
Right.
Crying Freeman. And but it's really a beautiful movie if anybody can chase it down. It's hard because it's never been released on anything in the US.
Yeah.
But it's really really a great beautiful movie, and lots of cool action and stuff.
Yeah.
And Christoph, when we were doing Crying Freeman, which was a much bigger budget than what we had done before, and we shot it up in Vancouver, and all of a sudden we're hiring kind of big time ADs and DPs and all this. And it was funny that the crew, once you start paying the crew, you get crews that where you're paying a lot more money to, they all have their own sense of self.
Right.
And it's difficult for Christoph started having a problem. We had all the equipment we needed. It was like, compared to the stuff I normally do, it was like, wow, an embarrassment of riches, and he was just having a hard time because the crew kind of didn't respect him.
Whoa.
Really? And he started actually kind of spending all his time with the second unit. The small crew.
Wow.
And in fact, it got so bad that at one point we reached the end of our production, or at least our projected production schedule. And we actually had a wrap party and dismissed the crew. And then the next day we went back to work with the second unit.
Oh, wow.
And shot another 10 days of some of the biggest stuff in the movie.
Wow.
Because the small crew responded to him. The big guys, they saw him as like this crazy French guy, inexperienced, and
yeah.
And when I remember at one point he was talking to me about it. He says, what's going on here? Why is this so brutal? And I said, it just appears to me that when you're doing an independent little movie, when you do your little horror movie and you don't have any money and you're piecing it together, you're kind of like a second lieutenant with a platoon.
Yeah.
If anybody knows, Army kind of structure, which I don't, but I know that much. Mm-hmm. I've seen Platoon, which is a pretty good movie. But a second lieutenant, those were the guys that they'd have a sergeant and they'd have maybe 20 guys in a platoon. The officer, the second lieutenant, every single person in that platoon.
Yeah.
And you have a relationship with them, you lead them. And I think when you're making a small movie, that's the way it is. You've got a small crew. Nobody's getting paid crap. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of personal relationships and pulling together. When you move up to a bigger movie, now you're not a second lieutenant anymore. Now you're like a colonel or something. Mm-hmm. And now you've got to have second lieutenants below you.
Right.
Now you have to have you have to kind of direct things in a more complex way, giving authority to other people, getting stuff done through a big structure. If there's a lot of money involved, then there's the people who are putting up the money. A lot of times they get some insecurities or maybe they have suggestions and you got to figure out how to deal with that, how to massage that, how to give them what they need or want.
Right. So be careful what you wish for.
And at the same time that you get what you maybe not as what you want, but maybe what at least you need.
Right.
And that's a very different, directing technique or talent. Yeah. And I think that's how I understand why someone like Stuart Gordon didn't become a huge director.
He probably preferred indie sets.
He would have loved, believe me, everybody, you ask the low budget guys and say, why did you always make the small budget movies? Did you just want all bullshit? Everybody wants to make the huge movie.
Yeah, of course.
Can you? I can't, but Stuart couldn't. He had his one big shot was Space Truckers.
Right.
Who's that? Who's the actor? I don't know, the big actor in that you just didn't respect him, because Stuart can take any actors and make them into something.
Right.
But if you look at Spielberg, he didn't deal with stars for a long time. I mean, he had been directing for 15, 18 years before he actually started dealing with stars.
Right.
Because it's a different relationship. They're more important than you a lot.
Right.
And I think very few indie horror guys ever are able to have that ability. Sam Raimi would be one.
Mm-hmm.
James Wan.
Yeah.
But you notice
Peter Jackson.
He still ends up, Peter Jackson, he still ends up in Blumhouse.
Right.
James Wan. I mean, I think a lot of these big, huge movies, the directors, they're doing one part of the job. It always reminds me of, at one point, I think it was in the 90s or maybe after the 90s, when Joel Silver used to make all these horror movies. He had this, who was he partners with in that Dark Castle thing? And they did House on Haunted Hill, and I don't know what the other
13 Ghosts.
13 Ghosts and all this. But the directors they got, sometimes you wondered, who's that?
Right.
And you realize that, well, when you make this, they weren't big budget movies, but compared to what indie guys do, they were big budget, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you work for Joel Silver, you do what Joel Silver wants.
Right.
It's not like you're going out there. And I think indie guys, you put together $100,000 to make a movie, and you think, well, this is going to be my calling card.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a success, maybe it works, but then you're going to go to a bigger movie, and you've got some producer who you're like, you don't have the power to really. To within that situation,
right.
I think it becomes a different issue. Sam Raimi pulled it off.
Yeah.
Because Evil Dead is the epitome of a indie movie.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't even shot in LA. It was shot, I think, in Michigan. Right?
Yeah.
And then he did get a chance to do, I don't know, did he do the ABC Murders after that?
I don't think so.
I get the feeling he did. And then he did that superhero one. What was it called?
Not Spider-Man?
No, I'm talking about the 80s.
Oh,
man.
okay. Darkman.
What was it?
Darkman.
Darkman, right, which was pre-digital,
yeah,
but very prescient superhero stuff. Very well done. And I think a lot of it had to do with this Bob Tappert, this
right.
producer. Somebody has to kind of negotiate how to, mount these kind of productions.
Yeah.
And then they did the TV show, that Sword and Sorcery one, the female.
Oh, Xena, Warrior Princess.
Xena, right. So that kept the money going in and stuff.
Yeah.
But then he got up. He did A Perfect Crime, I think it was called, A Perfect Crime, mm-hmm. where he's trying to be like A-list to show he can do mainstream.
Yeah.
And then, but it wasn't the grand slam, but he was able to do Spider-Man.
Yep. It all led there.
That's the big time. It's not being an A-list director, because it wasn't, an A-list director gets all the big ones.
Yeah.
But Sam Raimi did it. I think that Joe Dante mm-hmm. had his time where he, from the Howling, moving up into, he had those Toy Soldier one. He
right.
had He had some bigger, well, of course, Gremlins was such a hit. Not a big movie, but a hit. But it was still with the studios. Mm-hmm. And then you take somebody like John Carpenter. Halloween was an indie movie, but not the kind of indie movie that your listeners are thinking of.
Yeah.
Because it was financed by financiers. It was financed by a company. I forget the name of the producer financer that I know
Mustafa Akkad
produced it. Huh?
Mustafa Akkad.
Could be very well. But those guys were financing movies. Yeah. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, my understanding was that it was originally called The Babysitter, right?
I think so.
Halloween. And I think it cost like $300,000.
Yeah, it was really cheap.
Which back in 1998, it's pushing $3 million. It's $2 million, right? If you're looking at the value. Although back in the days, which almost all the movies I made were done on 35 and with Nagra recorders, and money didn't go as far.
Yeah.
I mean, actors and talent and all that, it costs more.
Yeah.
But today you don't need. All you need is a hard drive wrangler, a data wrangler. You don't have this. You don't have the raw stock. You don't.
Yeah.
Everything is much cheaper, and you can get away with so much less lights, which means so much less crew. You can shoot anywhere, which is why everything's done on location.
Yeah.
But anyway, John Carpenter with Halloween, that was a mammoth success. Mammoth. And then he and Deborah Hill did this pirate ghost one. What was it called?
The Fog.
The Fog, right. And it kind of didn't quite work. And it was like the cutting, they had to like try to piece it together to make it work, because it was kind of like James Wan's second movie about the puppet. What was it called? What's James
Annabelle?
Wan's second movie? No, that's way later. It was after.
It was after Saw.
After Saw, his next movie, he got more money, and he did this ventriloquist doll movie with a bunch of miniatures. What was it called?
I don't remember that.
I mean, it didn't work, but it's kind of sort of my favorite James Wan movie because I just love that. I just love the tone of it. I love where he was going with it, and I love the miniatures and stuff. Like I love the original Crow because everything was miniature.
Yeah.
There's something about miniatures that are just, I don't know, they're inspiring.
It looks cool. And I wish they'd bring it back. It's like practical effects, it feels very real.
I think it's sort of a classic. It's the soul of the metal guys.
Right.
It's like you get the feeling this is what metal guys, rock and roll metal guys, that's in their imagination, they're
right.
Crow, right?
Sounds about accurate.
But I think that, with James Wan, he had that one. It was a complete miss, but there's something very interesting about it.
Yeah.
And the Fog is similar. It was like, and I'm basically going off of a lot of watching the extras on the Shout Factory Blu-ray.
Those are great. I love those.
Fog. They have some great interviews, and you really realize that, wow, just like then he did, what did he do? Did he do The Thing after that, or The Escape from New York?
I think Escape from New York came before The Thing.
Yeah. So, and then, which kind of it got back in a certain lane.
Yeah.
The Thing, which I think most horror fans think is just fantastic, because it's all in the snow,
right?
Which is kind of cool, and it's kind of real Lovecraftian.
Oh yeah.
And it has like these, kind of still special effects that I don't think have quite been matched.
Mm-hmm.
And yet when you listen to the commentary, you realize it was just all a big mess.
Oh, yeah.
And the effects never worked. Of course, they never do work, which would be one advice I'd give to young horror directors or producers more than directors, both. Special effects never work, okay? If they always worked the first time, they wouldn't be called special. A real special effect is about inventing something.
Right.
However, it's tailored just to a little situation. They never work. And that's not a bad thing. That just means you got to work with it.
You need a level of ingenuity.
If you're dealing with special, and the solution isn't always with the effects guys.
Right.
They tend to dump on the effects guys. And then the producer is saying, we'll do it all in post. It'll be digital. And
a lot of that.
Like pure shit, because with your tiny budget, you can't afford any digital you can afford to erase some things. That's
right.
What you can afford to do. But you can't afford to build anything. It's going to look terrible.
Yeah.
It's just going to be cheap. But you can make miniatures and you can make puppets. And on those things, the effects guys can build it. And ideally, you have an effects guy who understands how to photograph what he's doing. A lot of them don't. A lot of them only understand the construction of it. Mm-hmm. And they want everybody to see it. And they don't like it if you start putting smoke and atmosphere and blinking lights and
anything
stuff.
that obscures the creation.
You're getting, because, hey, I did that incredible paint job. And that's not the point. I remember years ago when David Lynch was on some late night show, I think it was. Maybe this is a false memory, but I think it's true. I might have read it. I don't know. I remember seeing it on some late show. And he said, and they were asking him, I think, about special effects and stuff. And he says, you can make a monster out of a piece of cheese for a movie.
Yeah.
You don't, it's just how you shoot it.
Right.
And you're only trying to capture it for that moment, and you've got it. It doesn't have to work forever.
Well, to this day, he won't tell anybody how he did the baby in Eraserhead.
Yeah, well, he doesn't want to say that because I think he probably did something that today we would consider
probably
to be,
it's a fetal animal of some sort.
Not politically acceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. So one point that you raised, which I think was an interesting one, was when you were telling the anecdote about the director that you knew who just, when he got bigger budgets, he was not getting the respect with the crew, and it was a much harsher experience. I mean, you've done a lot of movies and they all have your signature on it. And you clearly have a very strong directorial hand. I feel like something that a lot of directors or would-be directors don't consider is the level of respect that they have to earn on a set, particularly on an indie set, when you have to usher people through really difficult conditions on low budgets. Throughout the course of your career, what were some of the keys for being able to build that level of respect where you can get people to walk through really difficult scenarios with you and just kind of be with you as a director?
I think most people tend to want to do the Clint Eastwood version of this.
Okay.
First of all, having movies that are successful gives you a certain amount of respect.
Yeah.
Actually, having made a few movies gives you a certain amount of respect. It's always more complicated when you start working with people who maybe are more accomplished than you are. Mm-hmm. Because they're just naturally, going to see you as someone who is less accomplished.
Right.
You would have to sell them on, I don't know, your talent or your know-how or whatever. They're going to I think generally the crew, the actors, and for a director, there's some key people on the crew that you need to have a rapport with.
Okay. And
believe in you. But then the main thing is the main actors.
Right.
And that's where you can, you need their they have to trust you in a certain way.
Well, who were those?
And,
Who were those select crew members that you really just need to be dialed in with?
Your first AD, you need to have a good relationship with your producer.
Yeah.
And I know today, there's this unfortunate, kind of thing about today, which is that making a movie is kind of a direct medium now.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't always like that. In original Hollywood, directors were very big and important, but it was kind of a producer's medium.
Yeah.
A lot of Academy Award winners didn't develop their projects, didn't cast the projects, didn't make up the schedule,
mm-hmm.
and didn't do the editing. They came in to direct.
Right.
And at one time, this was fine. I use I would refer you to the music business. When I grew up, back ages ago, there were singers and there were songwriters. And I remember in the 50s and 60s, when I was a kid, the people who sang the song didn't write the song. Elvis Presley didn't write his songs.
Right.
Most singers didn't write their songs. There were writers who wrote the songs. And there was a big folk wave in the 50s coming out of the beatnik era, and people sang traditional songs.
Mm-hmm.
And then this one guy came along and wrote his own songs. It was Bob Dylan, right?
Yeah.
He he was the singer-songwriter. So he was like something super special. And that, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that was kind of the first guy I remember he did sing a lot of songs at first that were traditional.
Mm-hmm.
Then he started singing his own stuff. Fast forward to today, any pop singer who has a hit, their name's on it.
Right.
Now, I read an article some years ago that said, all these big time singers today that have their name on it, the songs are still written by a handful of people.
Mm-hmm.
And then they put them out to market. Their agents, just like everything else, they put it out to market and see who wants to go for it.
Yeah.
But if a big time singer today picks it, Beyonce or God knows whoever, picks a song to do, well, of course, they're going to interpret it their own way. And part of that interpretation is they're going to put they're going to be one of the writers. That's part of the deal.
Right.
And just like in the early 60s, there were all these girl groups, the Ronettes and the Crystals, and there were just a handful of songwriters who wrote all those songs,
Right.
And then their producers would give them the song to sing.
Yeah.
They didn't invent their songs, and nobody expected them to. They were the performer, they were the singer. Frank Sinatra, did he ever write a song? I doubt it.
Probably not.
Right? But today, the idea is you've got to, if the singer didn't write the song, they're not an artist, right? You can't be a singer now, you got to be an artist.
Right.
And with directors, unless they write it and edit it and shoot it, and they're not an artist. And so every director, whether the first timers, it's not enough that they direct the movie. There's a certain skill to directing. But no, they had to have written it.
Right.
And they had to, and then they want to produce it. I get that, because producing just means that you have more control.
Mm-hmm.
Writing doesn't mean you have more control. Writing means that you want the best script you can get.
Yeah.
You're still of course you're going to shape it, But whereas in the past, Alfred Hitchcock would certainly shape his scripts, he would never horn in on the writing credit.
Yeah.
You know, he would never do that. Today, they would never not do it.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate result of this is that the young, you know, the new director, let's just say filmmaker, the guy that wants to make a movie.
Right.
You know, generally everybody likes to direct because you get to make all these little decisions.
Yep.
Well, you then you sort of want to be the writer too, because, hey, your uncle's paying for it or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you might even want to be the actor. God knows. You know,
Why not?
Big problem. And a lot of people want to shoot it. And then they want to direct, they want to edit it. I think Roberto Rodriguez edits all his movies.
Yeah, he does.
And to some people, that's a very natural thing to do, you know. And to other people, it's kind of a big mistake.
Interesting.
And I think that as incredibly lucky and talented and lucky it was to have Stuart Gordon direct Reanimator, it was also really lucky that he didn't, of course, and he did co-write it.
Yep.
Right? Dennis Paoli, William Norris also wrote it, and Dennis generally does all the typing.
Yeah.
But Stuart's very big on coming from his theater background, they did a lot of collaborations. He doesn't want to edit it himself or shoot it himself.
Yeah.
Whereas if he was coming up now, maybe he would.
I think it's an interesting point.
I've got to be the one guy because everybody's telling me that the director is an author and the director is a artist, and I'm kind of going, you know, in what other field you direct your first short and you're an artist? I mean, it takes like 30 years of making shoes to be an artist. You know?
Yeah, you're right. But it's a really good point.
You've got to learn the craft. Yeah. And I think that's deadly. I think it's a deadly idea. And I think sometimes that it can be, you know, it's coming from the 50s, the new wave. The French called it the auteur.
Right.
Well, auteur in France is author. That's all it is. It's they were the first ones in the 50s that would go to the Paris Cinematheque, and they could watch movies. They could just kind of check them out and watch them in the screening room. And that was the first time in history that anybody could just, besides a studio boss, could actually watch all of John Ford's movies, right? Because the Cinematheque in Paris had everything, or they collected everything they could, I guess. I'm acting like I'm very knowledgeable, and I'm not. But then one thing they noticed was that if you watch all these movies, there's one thing that tends to link them together more than others is who directed it.
Right.
Not always. It's not always that way. Sometimes that's not the case. You know, it's not always like that. But it tends to be very important. And so they wanted to base movie making on writing because it's a literary tradition for France because they have such a deep literary tradition.
Yeah.
And so they said, okay, somebody has to author it because that's how we do it with books. In my experience, very, very few times or not very commonly have I seen that one person really has such an inordinate influence on the film. Generally, I've found that it's a handful of people. And the people like Clint Eastwood, who made a success first as an actor, but then as a director, he always has the same crew. They always know what he's going to do. You know, he brings the same crew. Stuart Gordon was very similar in that because he spent 10 years directing theater before he ever shot a movie. In theater, there's this idea of the troupe you have these actors, and then as you do another play, you hand out the parts.
Right.
The
ensemble.
So he always liked that, to have that group, that family that made it. And I've done it a little, but not that much. I always like to have new people,
mm-hmm.
because I never thought that. I guess my opinion was generally that, if you're lucky, you've got one good idea, and if you're like a genius, maybe you have 2 or 2.5. I don't know. But if I used always the same people, I'd probably make always the same movie.
Right.
But but if you bring in a different writer, and you bring in a different DP and a different art director, and then I feel like, well, then there's going to be something new is going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And it's another approach. But I think that with a guy starting out with his uncle's money, you're going to have to find a producer. And if it's your money that's coming in, if you pulled in the money, well, that producer is probably not going to have any authority,
right?
Which is not good. It's hard to give up your authority, and so that means that nobody's going to run a check on you. They're not going to. When you start going off, every director gets unhinged. Always, it's part of the job,
and you need that producer to reel you back.
Well, it's good to have somebody who can kind of talk to you.
Yeah.
Hey, this is not a good idea.
And that's somebody who's experienced, obviously.
Or even if he's not experienced, because you're just starting out, at least it's someone that you at least trust enough, or at least and who you at least have to negotiate with.
Yeah.
And same thing goes for a DP. The more experienced the director of photography, and the director of photography in some ways is one of the slots, one of the jobs that I feel needs the more experience, the better, I think, with DPs.
Mm-hmm.
Because not that a young DP isn't going to do something really incredible.
Of course.
But the thing about movies is you're always fighting a clock. You're always, there's a limited time. There's limited money. There's a limited amount of light.
Mm-hmm.
And for you to, and when you want to try to kind of imagine a scene and come up with a plan for it, say, let's do it this way, you can get in trouble. You can paint yourself right into a corner. You can you can die during the day because you're trying to do some shot that you can't get off.
Yeah.
And I think when you have a very experienced DP, and I would never be afraid to hire an older DP. And most people don't ever want to deal with old people like me, because when I started out, I certainly didn't want to work with the guy that reminded me of my dad. Didn't want that. So I get it. I get why. Right.
Right.
But with a DP, it's very important. I think with Reanimator, Mac Alberg DPing, we brought him in after a week. For Stuart, it was just great because it was just very hard. We were going off in all directions. And then Mac Alberg was a Swede. He was another generation older. He had worked in Sweden, and Stuart really respected him. And so then he's the guy who could tell Stuart, I think you might want to get a little close up here for your coverage.
Yeah, you need that anchor.
Because Stuart was also in that this cartoon Hitchcockian frame of mind about just shoot what you're going to cut, because don't give them a chance to recut it. So some people go there, right?
Yeah, it's a smart strategy.
But it was very important that that we had that. And on Reanimator, for example, when we mixed it, because we were mixing in the old-fashioned days with 3-stripe. I mean, we had it was magnetic stripe audio tape.
Mm-hmm.
And so to mix a movie, you had to mix all the sound effects, all the dialogue, the music, all down to this 35 millimeter magnetic tape that would be synced up to the work print. And then they would all roll together while 3 guys on mixing boards would watch it and run the levels to mix in real time the movie.
Wow.
It's not like today where you get After Effects and you do it off your computer. You can put it wherever you want. It's not like that. It was like a performance. Those guys would generally, because we'd go to the big time places and here in Hollywood, and the guys we would get, you just wouldn't have much time to do it. That's all. With more money, you get more time.
Right.
And in Reanimator, we mixed in mono, so it was even less time. But the guys that were mixing it were old veterans. They were guys on the edge of retirement.
Wow.
When you get, after you've had your whole career, then you start doing these cheap movies, right?
Yeah.
Because the big movies want to get somebody who's hot right then.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is you try mixing your movie, and of course you go, I want it louder. I want it, But if you're dealing with these old professionals, they say, no, you can't do that.
Right. You need that.
You can't make everything louder.
Right. You need a parent.
It doesn't work. They're a professional. Let's put it that way.
Professional.
Yeah.
Better
and today, and I've worked with young filmmakers that they make their movies without ever involving a professional. Because you can.
Right. You can.
In Indiana, you can do that. You can make a movie anywhere.
But how does the movie turn out?
The thing is that you need someone. I mean, some people, maybe there's a Sam Raimi out there doing Evil Dead.
Mm-hmm.
There can be that. I mean, that does happen.
Yeah.
But in the wider sense, there's a lot of people making movies that, of course, nobody will see, and they're low or no budget movies. It doesn't mean they can't be good.
Of course.
The problem is you're basically dealing with all amateurs.
Right.
And of course, the interpersonal stuff's going to get out of control. You don't have professional actors. If you come out to LA and you do like a movie here and go and have a casting director, and you can get good actors, even if it's non-union. If you're going SAG, you can get real good actors. Mm-hmm. But if you're in Illinois or in Ohio or somewhere where they don't make a lot of movies, then the actors aren't going to be so experienced, and you're not an experienced director. If you were Stuart Gordon, you could make them work.
Right.
Stuart could take someone off the street and make it work.
Really?
He could work with them. He wouldn't be able to get them to do more than they're capable of, but he could get them to do something acceptable.
He could get the talent out of them.
Yeah, and then you have to make a story that makes sense, for your resources. And you certainly don't, if you're hiring all your friends, it's better that you cast them as baristas and, Carpenter, students.
Instead of the first AD.
Instead of casting them as like a lawyer or as a job that they have no idea of. Now you can get a experienced actor and they can handle all kinds of jobs. They've been trained, they know how to, and then your script probably isn't going to be very good also.
Right. Going back to the issue of alter theory.
Yeah. But even if you're not dedicated to being the author, where do you find a friend who actually knows how to write a script? And how do you learn what actually is a good script? How
With
do you know
experience.
what you're reading? And how do you know what you're looking at? When you get dailies, when you shoot something, you watch it, how do you know if the acting's any good?
Right.
If you don't have experience, you kind of don't.
So you need professionals involved.
When I made an amateur movie before I came out to LA, just with money I had, and I made a short film. I have no idea what I was doing, but I got some. It wasn't even film school guys. But back then it was the Department of Radio, Television, and Motion Pictures. And we shot it and we cut it and we got in. I went up to New York and brought down an editing machine. We shot it on 16 because I had a 16 camera. And we did a whole like short film. And I put it on VHS and I just thought it was great. I was like, wow, I love this. And I showed it to my friends. I still can remember putting it on on a VCR and sitting with my friends watching it. And all of a sudden my heart seized up and I realized, wow, this is like not good. Because I was with people who were trying to like it.
Right.
Never said a word against it. They were being very supportive. But it was a terrible experience because I realized before I watched it with somebody that wasn't involved in the production, I thought it was great.
Yeah. You need those objective eyes.
I just think, and that's another thing you should do before you lock your picture, is show it to somebody. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do, but show it to some audiences and sit with them.
Right.
And suffer it, because it's never going to be as good as you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And the good part is it's probably never going to be as bad as you feel like it is when you do that.
Well, that's a good consolation.
But I think that to me, that was a real lesson that's everybody. That's not me. It's everybody. Yeah. You look at it, what you worked on, you love it because you look at it so much. But then when you pull it out and people who really want to like it, I'm not talking about people that go, screw you.
Right.
Who do you think you are? It's people, your friends. And you realize, wow, I'm looking at it through their eyes now. And I realize I need to learn how to do this.
It's humbling, but it sounds like a very necessary experience. So to change tracks a little bit, as somebody who's so historically significant to horror, you're basically the architect of a lot of my favorite movies and my whole horror sensibility. What are your thoughts on the current state of horror as a genre? I mean, from where you sit, where is the genre right now?
I don't know. I mean, I don't watch all of it.
Okay.
Of course. It seems like it's gotten real mainstream.
Okay.
With The Walking Dead and stuff, which I think maybe The Walking Dead is the final iteration of Night of the Living Dead.
Maybe, but the weird thing is that Walking Dead fans are not always horror fans. Most of them actually aren't.
No, exactly. My point exactly.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, it's a soap opera. So my point is that I think that Night of the Living Dead is the kind of seminal horror movie of this era of horror. Yeah. I think it begins with Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
Not that there wasn't tons of horror before it and tons of horror after that wasn't really about that, but it seems like that seems like the beginning of the modern age of horror. Mm-hmm. And it's obvious that the zombies, the living dead idea, of course it's evolved. When Night of the Living Dead began, I remember seeing it the first time, and believe it or not, the first time I saw it, it was scary as hell.
Oh yeah, I bet.
It was, you can't imagine that now because you show it on afternoon cable, you watch it. it's for kids.
Right.
Night of the Living Dead now is kind of like any kid can watch it, right?
Yeah.
And not get upset.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, it was really, really punchy.
Mm-hmm.
But if you remember, that was never clear why they came back to life.
No, which I kind of liked.
And I must say that I just assumed, they never said it, but somehow I just assumed that if you got bitten, you'd become one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. It was just some implicit assumption. And maybe it was because in the movie, the girl's brother who gets bitten at the beginning comes back and hauls her off.
Right.
And I think that ABC, or 1 + 1 = 2, made me think that he got bitten. Now he's a zombie. Now he's going to bite her, but it was within in the text of the movie, he died. Mm-hmm. And then when you die, you come back to life.
Okay. Not you get bit.
You die.
Okay.
It wasn't how you die. In Dawn of the Dead, I perfectly remember one of the greatest ad campaigns of all time for especially a zombie movie was when hell is full, the dead will walk the earth.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, I love that.
It's cool
because it's macabre.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things I love about horror is the macabre element of horror. Mm-hmm. I like that part of it. It's kind of, it's, I don't know how you would define macabre. I've never tried to, but there's something kind of supernatural about it. There's mm-hmm. something kind of very human, like
right.
the evil of humans about it, but with a fantastical element.
Yeah. It's still
there's
grounded.
Kind of a religious sort of non-sectarian kind of part of it. And I love that idea, that hell's full, yeah. But then, of course, the critics, once something's very, very successful, then the critics quit slamming it and they start dealing with it like they don't want to get left behind
right.
from the audience. And then there's all these interviews with George Romero, and especially in Europe. It's all coming from over there.
Yeah.
And I noticed it was a black guy that survived and then gets killed by the redneck sheriff. And what was your message there? And by the time we got to Day of the Dead, George Romero had drunk the Kool-Aid all the way.
Oh, yeah.
And it was social commentary forward.
Right.
Because George Romero, ever wanted to. It wasn't like he was like, I just want to make horror movies. He just wanted to make movies.
Yeah.
Just like most directors. Not me. I like making horror. That's my first choice.
Yeah.
But most people don't want to do that. They want to, there's a lot of things they would like to make. Mm-hmm. And, but I think what's happened over time and culminating in the 28 Days Later with The Living Dead is that it became a disease,
right?
A communicable disease. So it was reflecting a different part of our kind of day-to-day life, things we're afraid of, and it's also reflected in the 2000s version of Evil Dead, mm-hmm. in which the cabin all the kids go to isn't a piece of shit like it is in that movie.
Right.
I mean, you watch Evil Dead and you go, really? This is your idea of a vacation? You're going to go to this piece of shit place in the middle of the woods? Come on,
right.
Get a tent, anything. And so in Cabin Fever, they go to a place that you go, yeah, middle class college kids would go to a lake with a nice house because of course. But it's going to be Evil Dead. There's going to be a threat by their own numbers, except now it's just a disease. It's like this skin thing where it peels mm-hmm. off. And it's a terrible death and you could catch it. So you got to kill them.
Right.
I think that encapsulates the modern era.
Hmm.
You know, it's not evil. You know, the Evil Dead was maybe, I would say, when they're listening to that tape recorder, man, it's pretty Lovecraftian.
Oh, yeah.
One of the best Lovecraftian scenes. Not that the demon threat, the kind of nature threat was Lovecraftian,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but the tape recorder, my God, that was really effective. You know, that's very macabre.
Yeah.
And of course, you can't say enough about Sam Raimi's imagination.
No, of course not.
Stop motion stuff and the fun of the whole thing. But but with Cabin Fever, it's just kind of like, okay, my friends are sick and I could catch it.
Yeah.
So I've got to kill them.
It's missing the macabre element.
I don't know, to a certain degree, maybe that's the death of Night of the Living Dead. I don't know.
It's full
maybe
circle.
It's not Evil Dead. Well, it's with 28 Days Later, it was just that they're very fast, which Dan O'Bannon had already done in Return of the Living Dead.
Right.
But then again, what Dan O'Bannon was doing EC Comics.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the guy who kind of solved the problem of how you do horror comics from the 50s.
Yeah.
Today in the movies, and nobody could do it with Creepshow and all that. They would always have comic pages,
right? And
they thought that the way you made a comic on a movie was to make it as empty as a comic frame with really flat colors. Remember the early the Dick Tracy movies?
Oh, yeah.
That. They thought, it's got to be because comics in the newspaper are by nature are just flat, colorful. It's not they don't do a lot of color mixing.
Right.
It's just yellow, blue,
yeah.
Like the old Superman comics and stuff.
Yeah.
So they think that's the way you make a comic book in the movie. I think Dan O'Bannon kind of showed us how you really do it. And after Return of the Living Dead, then, and now Joel Silver knew how to make the Crypt Keeper.
Right.
Now it was now the Rosetta Stone had been found and now you could do it.
Yeah.
And I think that, but he had the Living Dead running fast and they were eating brains, which is a ridiculous concept, but it certainly was common in those old comics.
Mm-hmm.
And it was grisly and there was a totally exploitative nudity and, rock and roll music. And it was, but with 28 Days Later, it was kind of more serious and it was kind of more believable. In Return of the Living Dead, it's kind of like a comic book. It's
absolutely.
It's fun. It's just fun. With 28 Days Later, it's this almost could happen.
Yeah, it feels like a drama.
It's almost, it's and these guys ran fast. It was just a problem in the lab because we're afraid of science and, we just think we're going to, we're afraid of all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, but then with Walking Dead, it just became a soap opera, but everybody's watching the zombie apocalypse because that's a thing now,
mm-hmm.
And everything's sort of the apocalypse now, right? Everything's going to crash.
Yeah.
Any minute. When I was a kid, the apocalypse was the bomb.
Right.
When I was a kid, we used to hide under our desks in bomb drills because the Russians were going to drop a nuke on us.
Right.
And that was a different type of fear. A lot of the horror of the 80s was based on the first horror movie I ever saw was called The Creature with the Atom Brain. It was a Living Dead zombie movie, but it was atomic.
Sounds like a Corman movie.
No, it's
pre-Corman probably.
Oh yeah. No, this was 1950. Oh
wow.
5 maybe. Look it up.
Okay.
It's not that bad. I used to always be kind of a bit reticent to mention it, that was the movie that really freaked me out. I was 6 years old.
Right.
But because it wasn't a famous horror movie. But since then I've looked at it, I can see, its antecedents and it is like Living Dead, man, but there's a sci-fi element. It's the atomic thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas today it would be, the Wuhan virus
Right.
gets into people, and now they are, they're communicable, and you're going to catch it. Except in a genre movie, what we do is in a horror movie especially, we condense the time. We accelerate the development. So it's not much fun to watch somebody die of cancer.
Right.
But if the changes that happen to you when you're dying are exaggerating, and they're kind of pushed down into like a 2-minute, 2-minute section, and you go, then it's a horror movie, right? And if it's an alien, even better, right?
Yeah.
Then you can watch any kind of horrible stuff, because there's a distance that you get from it. And I'm not sure about the horror of today. I think one of the things that I'm not real thrilled with is that it just seems like now it's like message first.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Like horror is all about the message. It's like, and now you have all the, it used to be the critics wouldn't even review horror. And I think it was better then. It was just, and if you liked it, you liked that. The critics were always going to say it was crap, and maybe they are crap movies, but if you enjoy it, I enjoy them. So
yeah,
I liked it. But now the artists that are coming up, they make their movie, and it's got the message is before the entertainment.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the message. This is important. And of course the critics support that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the audiences do or not, but it's kind of like, if it doesn't have this message, then there's something kind of disreputable about enjoying just a monster movie.
Yeah, it's different now. I mean, I feel like horror has always been a good vehicle for social commentary, but now it feels like the price of entry. Like your horror movie must have some message.
I don't know. My feeling is that, until the Romero things with Day of the Dead, and I mean, it just started slow and moved up, but I don't remember watching the Corman Poe movies or the William Castle movies or the Hammer movies and seeing the message on top of the picture.
They were just fun.
A movie, a book, a video a song is going to reflect the times in which it's made. You can't get around it. You are from this time. We live here. We live in this time. Whatever we do is going to be informed by it.
Yeah.
But to the extent that you decide that what's important is for you to give the politically correct message, because quite frankly, in 10 or 20 years, your message might look pretty clunky, right? Because things change. I don't know. It's not like a horror movie to me.
Yeah.
It becomes something else. I don't know. And that's the way I feel about horror today. And I don't know if there's a way out of it, because if I was starting out, I mean, maybe you need to do that just to get attention or to be, I don't know.
It's
maybe
strange.
It's like what you got to do, and that's just the way it is. What are your favorite horror movies from the last few years?
I liked, and I wish I had some more original answers for you, but I think Hereditary.
Yeah, that's what happens. See, you always ask people that.
Yeah.
And now you're on the spot. You go, damn, that's really hard to say.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of Ari Aster. I think Hereditary is one of the best things to come out in the past few years by a long shot. I enjoyed that a lot. And I liked his follow-up Midsommar, and I enjoyed The Witch as well. It's funny though, with his movies, I don't feel like there's a big message. I feel like they're definitely dramas. Mm-hmm. They definitely are movies that could work if you took the horror element out of them, which I think makes them really strong. And he's a very sophisticated, very educated filmmaker, which definitely, goes a long way. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think he's to me one of the most exciting new horror filmmakers who's out there. But I just recently saw one of my recent favorites was the Mortuary Collection from Ryan
I
Spindell.
don't know what that is.
It's good. It's on Shudder, and it's a anthology, and it reminds me of back when horror movies were fun. It echoes Hammer. It echoes Creepshow. It echoes Ed O'Bannon in a way. There's just a fun to it, and it's like a ride. It just reminds us why we got into the genre in the first place. It's not heavy-handed with a lot of messages. It's just fun, and it's beautifully done. And it was Ryan's first movie too, and it looks fantastic. But that was one of my favorites of last year for sure. Yeah, that's up there. But I feel like what's missing largely, and something that I think that you brought to a lot of your movies, if not all of your movies, was I don't feel there's a lot of subversion in horror anymore. I don't feel like horror is as dangerous as it once was. It doesn't get into taboo subject matter. It is even like shying away from sex. I feel like there's not a lot of sex in horror at all, not even innuendo. So
I think it's because of the politics of today, and
possibly,
the cultural changes we're going through. I think it's a kind of a third rail.
Right.
You could get burned.
Maybe.
If you how do you deal with it? Right.
I don't know. It's bad though, because
it's tough because in fact, my feeling always was that that horror, and I'm not just talking about movies, but traditionally horror is kind of all about sex and death.
Yep.
And involved in that is religion and psychology.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that if you kind of go there, if you start dealing with that, it's not going to be politically correct. And I don't even like using that term because I think even that term is out of date right now.
Yeah, feels that way.
But it's this idea that, because censorship really comes from society, comes from your neighbors. Comes from you. It doesn't, in certain authority, when you get to a very overt authoritarian political regime,
mm-hmm.
It can be the way it used to be in Eastern Europe when the Soviet Union was happening. But in general, or it could be like the what was it called? The film code or the code.
Right, the
code
Hays laws.
When they started saying, what, bad guys have to die. They got to suffer. You can show, a prostitute, but she's got to suffer, or a lesbian has to suffer.
Wow, really?
Make them, yes, because our culture didn't accept that.
Right.
We were, the culture promulgated a certain vision of how society should be. And so if you were doing entertainment that was showing elements that were unacceptable, they had to lose. They had to suffer for it.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like today, if you made a movie with a racist character,
mm-hmm.
that character would have to suffer for his racism.
Yep.
And there's no code that tells you that.
Right.
It's not like anybody's going to tell you that they're not going to release your movie, mm-hmm. but you'll find that even your friends are going to kind of back away because they feel the heat. And it could be that what you're saying, it doesn't necessarily mean that what you're saying is that character is right.
Right, of course. But you can't have flawed characters.
It may not be enough because we are living in this time, and this is a very fraught kind of time that doesn't allow for a lot of, just as, 150 years ago, you couldn't have, the picture of Dorian Gray would be like, it's very gay,
mm-hmm.
and you got to suffer if you're gay back then. Whereas today, if you suffer because you're gay in a narrative,
right,
that's wrong. Whereas 150 years ago, it couldn't be anything but.
Yeah.
And I think it makes it difficult. But I know what you mean because, people always say, oh, remake of Reanimator. And I say, how do you do the head-giving head scene in this world?
A part of me wonders if we're ready for, if maybe we've been so pure, it's been so puritanical that people would love something that is just completely no holds barred sexual.
I'm not sure that it's puritanical. I think that we've gone beyond that. I think the thing is that this sexual and racial evolution, let's call it, which is very much the battle of today. I mean, this is not, nothing's resolved.
Right.
The battle is raging right now. We don't know where it's going. And it could be that the pendulum, I mean, right now, the kind of licentiousness that we have, the kind of immorality that we have today, immorality in the sense of maybe amorality or whatever. I mean, there was a time when, I watched Psycho when it first came out, and it was shocking to see a toilet on screen. Right. And you couldn't see the stand-in for Vivian Lee's breasts. Mm-hmm. You couldn't see that. Maybe a French movie would show you a topless woman.
Right.
But that was impossible.
Right.
Things change, and back in those days, money could never be the reward for someone breaking the rules.
Yeah.
Well, once we got to the Reagan era in the 80s, greed is good. We're still living that. It's like it's good to get rich. Mm-hmm. That's all. It's just good to be rich. Whereas when I was, in the 50s and 60s, you didn't want to really flaunt it.
Right.
It wasn't considered good to be greedy and all that. But now greed is good. Greed is good. We're getting to the edge of that. I think the pendulum is swinging.
Yeah.
And I think that and look at the pornography we have. You just take your cell phone. We have incredible pornography, and it's like, how dare you say that that's bad? It's good. These are sex workers, and so we don't know if all this type of feeling is this culturally, will it swing back and we'll go back into some kind of rigid kind of restraint? I don't know. And it's not up to us. It's not up to us, of course. It's like these big movements of history and culture, and you don't want to get caught up in the wrong side of it, of course, But if you're making a story, you're making a movie, I don't think I'm the guy who would know how to
navigate
to thread the needle.
Right.
But I think the younger people who are coming out and making independent horror movies, depending on what they liked, if they're a lot of people make a horror movie because they just think it's an easy way to get into the movie business.
Right. And then they'll make real movies afterwards.
Yeah. And that's true, I think. But there also are people who just really like the genre.
Yeah.
And like horror from, Nosferatu to Bram Stoker to Stephen King. I don't know. They just like all that kind of stuff. But I think that those people making their first movie, their second movie, I kind of get the feeling that they're a part of the emerging culture, and they probably will know how to kind of maneuver it.
Yeah.
How to make it enough message, but still a thrill ride. And if anything, I think the thing that I miss the most is just the pure carnival fun of a horror movie. I don't see that much. I don't see movies that I just think, wow, that's scary. That's crazy. It's shocking. I don't get that. I don't see a Texas Chainsaw right now where you go, Jesus Christ, what did I just watch?
Did you see Terrifier?
No.
That one gets pretty rough. That, to me, that's one of my other favorites of recent years is Terrifier. It's
but I'm not sure. But rough means what? I mean,
the gore is very
inventive. In the early 2000s, there was this idea of torture porn.
It's not quite torture porn.
Oh, you know what? If we just show as much pain as we can, that's really something. And you go, that was never the point.
No.
The point was never to just kind of see how much we can represent some horrible event.
Yeah.
There's something else to it,
There's something else in Terrifier. It echoes the fun of old slashers, and it gives you this kind of dangerous feeling that I haven't felt since I was a child. When you watch a movie and you're 10, 11, 12, and you think this movie might be a little too much for me to take. I haven't felt that in decades. And then I saw Terrifier. And then there's moments where I'm like, oh shit, this might be more than I can handle. But it's good. And not in a torture porn way. In just like a good, hard slasher kind of a way. Very no holds barred. I enjoyed that one a lot. Yeah. Well, Brian, this was a tremendous pleasure and a huge honor. So thank you for taking the time. Any parting wisdom for those aspiring filmmakers out there?
Good luck.
Perfect.
I sound like the old codger, don't I? Good luck. Hey, I am. I became the old codger. What can I say? I was never this guy, and now I am. Okay. I accept it.
All right.
Okay. Anytime, Nick. Thank a lot.
You again.
It was fun. Anytime.
Thank you. All right. Here are some key takeaways from this conversation with Brian Yuzna. Number 1, focus on movies, not milestones. As Brian mentioned, many directors enter Hollywood obsessed with finding a manager and finding an agent. Why? When you're just starting out, you don't need an agent or a manager. You need a fucking film. That should be your focus up front, which is to get yourself a calling card. So whether it's a feature or a short, get your name out there and the managers and agents will follow. Number 2, be careful what you wish for. Higher budgets mean higher pressure. Brian talked about a filmmaker friend of his who worked up the ranks and started with an indie film and then ended up with a higher budgeted movie, but found that the crew was incredibly difficult to work with because they didn't respect him. This is a hard scenario, and clearly most professional crews would never act this way, but it does happen. The unfortunate lesson here is regardless of whether or not you're the director, as you move up in the ranks, you're always going to have to prove yourself and deal with people who think they're better and more experienced than you. Find ways to work with it or work around it. In the case of Brian, they pretended to wrap the movie early and then finished the movie with the second unit crew because they were way more agreeable and way easier and more pleasant to work with. Hierarchies will always be there. Movie making is unfortunately less about your talent as a filmmaker and more about leadership and people management. Number 3, hire an older DP. This is a big one. You're probably going to think that you want some new cutting-edge DP to helm your movie. But if you're just starting out, you're going to want a DP who's more experienced and can act almost like a parental figure who can rein you in when necessary. When hiring, your DP is arguably one of the most important hires because this is the person who will guide you on how to make the movie, shot by shot. So you'll need somebody experienced, particularly if you're on your first, second, or even third movie. So consider hiring somebody who will keep you in line and on quality. Older professionals have the experience and the wisdom to do this, and they can keep you and your movie in line and on time. Anyway, guys, thank you as always for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with your friends and family on social media? Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at I'm Nick Taylor. That's I am Nick Taylor, and on Twitter at the same handle. Thanks again for listening to the Nick Taylor Horror Show. Hey guys, one last thing before you head out. If you haven't already, don't forget to check out my 10x10 horror watch list. How would you like a list of the 10 favorite horror movies of 10 of your favorite horror directors? Well, I just hooked your ass up. The 10x10 horror watch list features a breakdown of the 10 favorite horror movies from 10 renowned horror directors, including Ari Aster, James Gunn, Quentin Tarantino, Jordan Peele, Martin Scorsese, and many, many more, all in an easy-to-reference PDF. You can download this guide for free as my gift to my dear listeners at nicktaylor.com/horror guide. That's nicktaylor.com/horror guide. Check it out and let me know what you think.